So last year we had some interesting keynotes, and this year I think we're going to have an interesting keynote. I met Ben Fried when I joined the ACMQ editorial board. So ACM is Association for Computing Machinery. It's a professional organization for people like us. And it's a largely academic-focused organization, but it does have an arm that focuses on the practitioner. And I was very pleased when I think Brian Cantrell, who's sitting out there somewhere, yeah, right there, and invited me into the ACMQ circle, and I got to talk to smart people, and it was a really interesting opportunity. So thank you for that. And I met Ben there, who is extremely interesting. And one of the things that we lose sight of so much in engineering is that we think about the problems and we think about the solutions, but we never frame the problems right. We're always framing the problems wrong, and it's as soon as we realize that, we can take a step forward, take a step backwards, and then cha-cha. But the problem is bigger than what we're looking at. It's always bigger, and it's always changing. So the DevOps community that has sprung up is an interesting one because it really focuses on culture. And of course, when you get into a group of people that's evangelical, right, it's suddenly only about culture. And then you have a conference like this, and last year we're about engineering, and it's only about engineering. And I think that there's a really healthy perspective that needs to encompass all of that, and that's what Ben's going to talk about. He's going to talk about how if you screw any part of it up, you screw all of it up. So scalability is not easy. So Ben Fried.
All right. Can I be heard? I'm told I'm supposed to wait for a thumbs up from the fellow. Yeah, all right, thumbs up, good. Okay. So actually, I hate to begin such a great forum by correcting my host, but actually Theo and I first met by email, I want to say in 1999, as the author of Mod Backhand, upon which I perhaps somewhat naively decided to base an entire SSL termination load balancing architecture for a large multinational investment bank on. And it was only actually 3 weeks ago that I found out that Theo was probably not yet at the age of majority at the time he had written that. Nonetheless, it ran with a bunch of enhancements from us. Theo's code ran a big chunk of the bank for a long time. So Theo, actually, we exchanged email and knew each other in some sense long before the ACM thing, which is one of the reasons why I was so happy to have you on the board. So I talked to Theo and I talked to Brian, who was last year's keynote speaker, to try to get a sense of what works in front of an audience like this. And I must admit, when I look at the agenda today and tomorrow and yesterday, and kind of look at the credentials of the today and tomorrow and yesterday, and kind of look at the credentials of the people in the room, you're an impressive bunch. And I asked Brian and Theo, well, what works? What's the best way of delivering a message? And they both. Theo said war stories, and Brian, if you know Brian, you might laugh at this. He said, practitioners want to understand the pathologies of failure, because through understanding the pathologies of failure is a unique way in which we can learn by understanding our mistakes and the mistakes of others. So the kind of Google simultaneous translation went off in my mind, and I said, aha, disaster porn. So I'm here to share a little disaster porn with you, and not to kind of spoil what's coming up later, but I think of it as about how we scale and how we should scale people and organizations that care about scalability. So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about. So now let me give you all kind of a little teaser. 7 years ago, I wasn't working at Google. It was for my previous employer, which was a large multinational investment bank. And I had what was up to that point the worst day of my career. And the worst day of my career quickly became the worst week and the worst month and probably the worst quarter of my career. So what accounted for that? The plummeting fall that took place for me was I was on the floor of the equities trading floor looking over a trader's shoulders, and I watched a monitoring system for an application that I had designed as it showed daily revenue go from a figure in the many, many, many millions of dollars to zero in less time than it's taken me to introduce my speech. So that didn't make me feel good. Let me tell you a little bit more about that about what happened there. And I would add, let me add kind of two things. One is that we're all here as professionals, I think, to understand, as Brian puts it, the pathologies of failure. These aren't meant to be comments on an employer or colleagues or anything like that, but take this as mortality and morbidity, an attempt for us all to understand and learn through each other's learnings. Secondly, I will have to admit that confession like this is therapeutic. I hope you all get something out of this, but if you don't, the therapy will have been good for me, so thank you. So, a little bit more context. What was this application that I was talking to you about? What was I doing and so on? I had, for many years, I had built and ran the team that was responsible for internet infrastructure and web platforms at large international investment bank. And I had been asked to lead the kind of platform design of an application that we would classify today as an institutional equities trading system for our customers. Now, to put that in a language that some of you probably understand that, but if you don't, have no fear, I didn't until I was asked to do it. So what we were trying to do, what the goal of the application was to give people who traded stocks at companies or places that had a lot of money to trade, right? Not individuals, not people like me or you or something like that, but asset managers, funds, corporate treasuries, governments, give them a tool that they could use to execute strategies around how they wanted to push money into and pull money out of the equities markets. We're talking about organizations with a lot of money to move through the equities markets. We're talking about big numbers. So, you know, the reality of it was that the company had built up this incredibly powerful, scalable trading infrastructure with unique facilities in, at least at the time, we believe them to be unique facilities in the equities world to do things I don't need to describe to you, but were hard to do and very, very important for people who care about trading stocks, especially when you have to trade a lot and you don't want to move the markets and so on by doing that. So the goal was to put an application on the desks of, offer to big customers, people who could move a lot of more stocks through us, which would, more stock purchase buys and sells through us, give them an application on their desks that would instantly kind of connect them to us and allow them to execute their trades through us, manage their trading strategies through us. This was the goal of the application. So it was a desktop application, and although it used the internet and so on to connect back to us. Now, the observation that I and a teammate of mine had in designing the application, the one that led to what was initially a tremendous backpatting and victory lap after the app was released, was that, you know, we had all this infrastructure, we had all this code inside the company. By hijacking the APIs that developers inside the companies already used to build internal systems, we just overloaded these APIs to take care of all the messiness of the internet. SSL tunneling, authentication, authorization, reconnect, going through proxies, you know, all this stuff, right? So make it, developers wouldn't have to know anything, the applications would just, you know, on the clients, at the at the companies who were using this stuff on the desktops, the application would just look like a web client, right? It would, no special configuration required on the client side other than the ability to install the app, and no re-education about, no re-education of our development community or the existing operations communities about the intricacies of large-scale distributed systems over an unreliable and untrusted network, which is kind of what we all deal with, you know, in the world of the internet, right? No one would have to know anything; they just have to build another app, right? And you know, in the spirit of backpacking, the launch was an astonishing success, right? If you were kind of properly had the right relationship and were properly permissioned, you know, with a small download and a phone call, you could be up. Your company could be up and trading in 5 minutes, right? And it was a huge win, and you at your company, you didn't need, the people at the company didn't need to bother to talk to their IT department to make this happen, right? Every company has an IT department, and they're usually kind of the people who tell you not to do things, right? And they didn't have to deal with that. We had taken care of all that with, you know, it was maybe 9 years ago we did this. SSL tunneling was still somewhat novel. I realize this is kind of talking about cliche at this point, but I'm an old fogey, so bear with me here. So huge success. It kind of worked its way in, and we had to scale up. You know, this was the first scale-up challenge. How do we go from, oh my God, we've got hundreds of people using this, wanting to use this, like we can't kind of take care of the demand fast enough, right? So we very quickly scaled up the organization to handle the operational load of distributing the application, supporting the application, operating the application, and so on. Now, it's at this point I should probably, and telling you about the application, I should give you a few more technical details that'll help you understand what I'm going to talk about more a little bit later as we get into the really XXX rated part of our disaster porn. So first little bit of information about the application is that it pretty much spoke over the network doing three kind of different things. One was we fed it what they call real-time market data, right? Pricing information about equities that we pulled directly from the exchanges and pumped through an SSL tunnel over the internet, over a proprietary transport protocol or application protocol we had built. We pumped into the application, right? The second kind of connection that the application had back to the mothership was to send us trades, right? Send us messages, short messages, indicating a trade, right? And that trade would flow into this enormous trading plant infrastructure and get executed along with the strategy that the customer had also described. And then the third bit of connectivity was a handle back to a pub subsystem that would give the customer updates about how the trade or their trades were being executed, what the status of all the trades were. So three sets of connections over SSL tunnels coming back to the mothership, right? The other thing I should mention is since these were high-value clients, and really none of these clients were anything other than high-value clients, almost inevitably at some point in the life cycle of a client, we would offer or try to get them moved from just using the internet to some kind of point-to-point connection. And in the world of Wall Street, leased lines and point-to-point connectivity are an incredibly common thing for reasons that are probably obvious to you all, right? You want to guarantee quality of service. You want to have a path that the two endpoints can control. The internet is great for ad hoc connectivity, for anonymous connectivity, for things like that. But if you're going to be pumping hundreds of millions of dollars through an app, maybe at some point you want to be able to assert quality of service over the connection between the endpoints. So many of clients ultimately move from, the typical path was client would try the app, start out through an internet download and some permissioning, they'd be off and running quickly. And at some point, we had a whole team that would transition them to a leased line or other kind of dedicated point-to-point connectivity to move them to a QoS path. Okay, so you may think that's more than you wanted to know about how this trading system worked, but it'll help you laugh at me in a few minutes. So, next little bit, back to that day. So it had been some amount of time after this app had launched with great fanfare, and I had been very happy to receive the accolades that came to me and my team as a result of a big success that was creating money, creating revenue that hadn't existed before. But maybe you all have kind of experienced this as well. There was noise about the app was kind of starting to appear on my horizons, and at this level I was a third-level manager. As I jokingly refer, I was an executive at this point, right? And but noise was coming up to me at my executive levels about, there's problems with the app, it's not working so well, there's a customer complaint. And so I would do what anyone does when you get kind of random complaints about some piece of technology. I said, give me the data, show me the data, tell me what's actually going wrong, give me something like that. And this almost inevitably had what was probably the desired effect on my part of sending the complainer away mumbling, never to return to me. So, yeah, someone has a T-shirt here that says something along that just because it's up doesn't mean it's working. Yeah, okay. Works for me. That was the lesson of the day there. So anyway, so with lots of noise. Then at some point, I was no longer able to ignore the noise. I got what I refer to as the call. And to protect the innocent, to protect the guilty, to protect my children, let me just say that a very important person in the company called me and made it clear to me that it was in my best interest over the short term to proceed from my cubicle in the technology building directly across the street to the trading floor and sit with the poor fellow who ran this trading desk and see what was going on, and that the consequences for me and maybe the immediate members of my family would not be pleasant. So heeding this sage advice, and if you ever do get this call, I urge you to heed it. Violence is never pretty. Unemployment is a national challenge at this point. So I went across the street. I found the trader desk. And, if any of you have ever seen pictures of or been on trading floors, particularly equities trading floors, right? There was this guy who ran this particular operation on this enormous open floor, it's pretty much a city block in Manhattan. That might not mean anything to you. It's big. There's lots and lots of long desks with people with lots of screens and so on doing work. A guy sat at kind of the head of one of these long desks. He ran this business of enabling clients to trade through us through this application we helped them put on their desktops. he had a very unhappy look on his face, and I saw that there was this big support team around him that were essentially phone support for the clients running the application, right? And they were all on the phone. Some of them were on 2 phones. You know, there were lots of phones on trading floors, and it was not uncommon to see people with a phone on each shoulder and another phone here, and the speaker phone over here with a mic, and you know, lots of people were on lots of phones, right? And this was not a great time for me to say, "Show me the data," right? If nothing else, they outnumbered me. So I didn't. And then actually, as fate would have it, soon after that, as they're all talking and saying, well, we're looking at it, da-da-da, you know, you can imagine what the kind of background noise was that I was kind of picking up as I looked around. I got a page. I got a page that actually we had identified that there was a hard failure in the system and it was going down. I was like, oh. So I had to tell this guy, the guy who ran this desk, this was going on. He said, all right. And he told all his people, tell all the clients to trade away. And he had, you know, a lot of really good developers there. He had this beautiful Windows application on one of his six or 8 screens, right, that showed a real-time view of all the trading activity that all the customers who used this app had pumped into us, right? All the pending trades, you know, what the gross value was, what the revenue, what the P&L impact of that trade would be for the company. And it was an impressive long list, the kind that had won me accolades earlier. And however, I now got to which as I heard trade away, the words I kept on hearing was, yes, we're sorry, trade away, yes, we're sorry, trade away, yes, we're sorry, trade away from 15 or so people around me. And I watched this long list, and you know, that total column in boldface go to 0. Yes, that was not a good day. That was the nadir of my career, I'd say, at that point, as I watched lots of money that hopefully would have helped pay my salary disappear, never to be seen again. So anyway, but when you're at the bottom, you're also at the beginning of your movement back up, right? And another way I like to phrase that, and kind of it's not related, but I thought I'd share it with you all, is if you save it for the last minute, you only need a minute to do it. But they're kind of related somehow. Someone can help me figure out how those 2 statements are related. Anyway, so thus began the long march, the journey of 10,000 miles that began with a single step to fix this problem. And as it turned out, the reason why they'd been calling me is in large multinational company that we had scaled up and serving this application to lots and lots and lots of people, making lots of revenue. Can you guess how many people actually had any end-to-end understanding of how the application worked? Yeah, it was kind of, no, there was two. There was 2. So if I got hit by a train, there was someone else, the tech lead who had taken over the infrastructure team for me after I had kind of moved on a little bit. So 2 of us had some understanding of how this whole thing worked from end to end, and our understanding was, you know, maybe only 80% complete. And we're software guys, right? That's all you really need. So anyway, so I very quickly found myself in an auditorium that seated about as many people as this one does, the largest auditorium in the company, in front of a bunch of hastily assembled whiteboards with a whiteboard marker. Or maybe that was the time I used a Sharpie on the whiteboard. I don't remember. But it was with the marker drawing out in a packed room how this application worked. And that was, you know, the good news is that was the beginning of this long march to fixing it, as I said. A lot of interesting phenomena, just social phenomena about that meeting, about that session. None of those people had ever been in the damn room together before, right? I mean, yeah, there was, over here there's the security operations team, and over here there's the network operations team, and over here there was the equity trading operations team, and here was the web operations and internet infrastructure operations team, and here were the middleware engineers, and here were the application developers, and here were the business people, right? And everyone knew pretty much how things worked up to the conceptual demarc of their organization's responsibilities. And at that point, it was all fuzz. And then maybe in some cases, they didn't even know there was a system, right? That this application existed. They just knew, I maintain this particular bit of code, or I'm responsible for this set of operations, right? So I'll talk more about that. That was a problem. But like I said, this was the beginning of how we fixed it. So now it's time for the XXX disaster porn, give you some technical details about what it was that had actually gone wrong in this app. And this is largely, hopefully for your amusement. You know, I say that the most interesting thing is that big disasters rarely occur as the result of one thing. It is the confluence of multiple factors that inevitably leads to disastrous and spectacular failure. And clearly that was the case here, as there were problems, pathologies at many, many levels of the stack and thus in many parts of the organization. So the first one, the one that was kind of the lowest hanging fruit, but also the most pernicious, was, listen, we had done what were not naive things and had a dedicated bit of internet plant just for this application, given its kind of criticality, profit and loss criticality to the company. Had its own load balancer at a gig-y connection ultimately to the border router and the internet. Turns out that although, yes, the load balancer had a gig-y port, it was actually rated for maximum throughput of 45 megabits. And if you're an old-timer like me, you could probably name what this particular device was. But yeah, gig-y. Yeah, so the capability of the offer, there was a great little introduction to queuing theory in the lightning talks yesterday. And certainly the capability for offered load to exceed throughput was dramatic. It was multiple orders of magnitude, and that was a problem. What made it even worse, and this was one of the comical elements, is that in the great sea of weekly changes that take place in any large network, someone had blocked the SNMP trap port between this device and our monitoring systems. And of course, once it's blocked, you don't know it's blocked. Everything is working. It's all green. It's all green. It's all good. I'm not seeing any problems. So, as bad as I felt as I walked the fellow in the network operations team through getting on the console of this device, enabling and executing the commands to show the actual state of it, we heard him going from utter confidence in their network. I heard him going from the state of utter confidence in the network management systems and the quality of the network and so on to a level of despair that was probably anew for him as well. Anyway, so problem number one was, this was an obvious kind of technical problem. It was really fascinating. While an easy thing to identify, actually, as it turned out, fixing it required changing load balancer technology, and that's actually fairly hard, right? Especially at that point when we were moving from technologies that were based on kind of primitive level 1 sorts of load balancing to more sophisticated things. You actually had to make a pretty significant architectural change to accomplish the same sorts of things we'd accomplished by load balancers that just looked like bridges. But anyway, that's kind of a detail. It took a long time to fully replace the load balancers, but at least once we got the traps up and the monitoring done right, we could handle it better. Then, another element, I gave you all this, what you might have thought was unnecessary detail about how the application worked, right? So it had, one communications path, one port between the application back on the mothership was to send trades, right? Here's the strategy, here's the trade. And initially, these were short, concise, pithy messages depicting, just taking a couple hundred bytes, right? And however, we had the company, the technology group there had a love affair with XML, a long-term love affair. Many love affairs, just as many marriages end in divorce, many technology love affairs should end in a similar state. And keep in mind also that we had gone to great lengths not to differentiate the internet from normal trading activities and normal systems that took place on a high quality of service, highly managed corporate wide area network and metropolitan area network, right? So can you guess where I'm going with this or with what had happened? I've kind of laid down a few clues. This nice short 300 or 400 byte trading message turned over the course of a year or something like that, got to be about 3K. And beyond just the size and the latency introduced by the size and so on, as you all know, there's a magic threshold, typically around 1,500 or 1,536 bytes, where you're very likely, you're kind of asking for fragmentation of your message, right? Sure, the internet is composed of all kinds of crazy things, and at some point there's probably smoke signals between 2 points, right? But in general, you can be rest assured that when you cross 1,500, at least back in that day, you could rest assured that when you cross 1,500 bytes, you were asking to have your message fragmented. And that was producing over the unreliable internet, out of order delivery and so on. And TCP would always do its thing, and the message would come through correctly and all that. But it added to, we had seen a hockey spike in what I would call non-determinism of trade order delivery messages, and that had been caused by messages just growing as a result of people wanting to add more fields and more values to these trading messages, which just kind of took place in the normal atherosclerotic accretion that is the steady state of application development, right? So, this is an awesome one. You guys will love this. So remember I talked about separate quality, a high quality of service path. We would go and have dedicated lines point to point because these customers it was so much value to us. We really wanted guaranteed quality of service. Well, You'll never guess how we actually routed that traffic, that quality of service dedicated leased line traffic. It kind of, someone had to figure out, all right, how do I connect this to this internet-facing plant, and how do I make all this leased line traffic coming in over this leased line path hit this internet-facing plant? And it was brilliant. They put together something kind of like our approach with tunneling. They did something that worked very quickly on day one. They just took all that QoS leased line traffic, routed it out through our public externally facing internet interface, and back around through the internet. Actually, in many cases, because of the way we did routing, multiple ISPs, going out through one ISP, into another ISP, back into our internet-facing infrastructure. We called this the giant paperclip in the sky. And the sad realization was that we had actually totally screwed up quality of service with our quality of service offering. I'm sure there's one of these, fail blog sites has a picture that if I had slides, I would have used to depict this moment of realization in our lives. So there were a large number of other things that kind of added up to the problems that we had. There were a bunch more subtle things with when you're having proxies doing SSL termination, the right semantics around connection closes and passing connection closes from client to server. I mean, all the problems that take place when you're trying to tunnel a transport, in a transport, in a transport, maybe in a transport again, right? And there are a number of corner cases there that aren't necessarily obvious that you have to get right. And it took us a while to kind of iterate through the code, find the corner cases we had missed and get them right. But, we're kind of getting to the long tail here. No, there was one particular problem we had. As we kind of knocked down the major problems and we could demonstrate that we were doing better with stability and reliability and QoS and so on, there were still, an interesting minority of users who were calling up with problems that sounded a lot like the problems we'd had in the bad old days just months before. And because we had built this enormous multifunctional, multidisciplinary team, at some point it was pretty quick. We got I remember this fellow is a phenomenally talented network engineer. We had sniffers on, virtually any wire that had anything to do with this app had a dedicated sniffer on it at this point, right? And we were collecting terabytes of packet logs so we could understand what was going on. And so the guy grabbed some of the packet logs and he looked at it and he says, all right, I'm looking at the timestamps, okay. The guy comes in and the machine powers up. We're seeing the first connectivity. It's market open. It's about 10 minutes later. And look, his TCP window size goes down from something normal to, 1 to 0. Can any of you guess what was going on? Because this guy figured it out. He said, call up the client and check and see if they have any malware problems. So what happened was, this guy I assume it was a guy, most traders are, had turned his PC off at night, turned it back on in the morning, but it was totally polluted and filled with malware. As it turns out, the daily virus scan was supposed to happen while he was away from home, because he was away from the office, but he turned off his PC at night, so it never actually ran. I think antivirus software has probably gotten better in the last 10 years or something like that, but this was the state of affairs, and he was probably, a spam engine for, he was probably serving spam on behalf of some botnet in Eastern Europe or something like that. But this was killing his performance doing anything else. And just as a bit of kind of troubleshoot foo, I remain to this day really impressed by a network engineer who was able to just look at a pretty raw TCP dump. And Wireshark did not exist in these days. I guess Ethereal did, but Wireshark did. But to look at that TCP dump and to go from a pretty raw TCP dump to call him and see if there's malware pretty quickly, that was impressive. It was impressive. So anyway, so those were a bunch of the kind of interesting technology causes of what had gone wrong. And the problems that we had. But let me tell you about what the real causes of all these outages were and all these problems were. And you probably have a pretty realistic view of it right now by the way I've described things. But we had to scale up this organization to deal with our own success. Right? We had to scale up how we did ops, really, how we did deployment, to deal with the fact that the app was in tremendous demand. And without even thinking about it, the way we scaled up was through specialization, right? Let's get a team that will be really good at getting this app deployed on customers' desks. Let's get a team that will, let's add people to the network operations team to handle this bit of this. Let's add people to the security team, right? Let's add people to the trading plant team. Each operating within a specialization boundary and an organizational boundary that defined their role. And even though these were, for the most part, really talented people, really, really talented people. I have nothing bad to say about the quality of the people at all. The way we had chosen to grow the organization and the roles we had created for them in this organization never actually said that understanding how everything works is really important. So that was problem number one. I'll talk about it more because it's really informed my thinking, and it's also, I think, I'm glad to say it's created the approach at Google to how we do operations is, I think, informed by much of the same opinions as the opinions that I drew from this experience, although these obvious things obviously happened independently. So I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But another thing that I think was a problem, and this is getting more into the technical, not just kind of the social and organizational, is that it was, dare I say, a bit arrogant of us to think that through smart software and smart infrastructure, we could completely hide from application developers and end users the fact that they were building and running an application on an inherently unreliable and untrusted network. Right? And that had gotten us by making an unreliable and untrusted network look just like, and when you think about what all that means for the implications for running and operating and engineering a distributed system, it was kind of cool we could make that look like a highly controlled network with far more capacity and far better ability to control it. It was cool we could make it look like that, but they're not the same thing. And at some point as we scale, inevitably, that became a problem, and we had done too much to make things look similar in ways that they actually weren't. This may be a problem that was unique to kind of us and the challenges and the culture that we had, but I think it's definitely interesting because I see over and over again as I look at the APIs and the frameworks that are being developed to build web applications about kind of the transitions between database technologies that are taking place and networking technologies. There's a tremendous desire to make the complicated, the inherently hard, right? To make the fundamentally not really solved problems seem like solved problems in our discipline. And that works, in my experience. It tends not to always work perfectly, and it tends to only go so far. And you unfortunately, especially in the realm of scalability where we all play, where we all work, you need to be able to transit the barriers of abstraction created by these approaches. So I could wax on with more polysyllabalism about this. I think I'll move on to the next topic. Although, I mean, the other obvious thing about how we got in here was that at the end of the day, we had a poorly understood system, right? It was inadequately there was no group that understood it operationally in a complete sense, right? And the normal forces of entropy that take place through daily, weekly, et cetera, change had an enormous impact. Change is the root of all evil for those of us in the operations world, right? If nothing ever changed, we'd all be our pagers would be far quieter. On the other hand, that gets to the unemployment topic again. But the problem really was that we didn't couple an ability to change with an ability to understand change. And the lesson there, really pretty deep lesson, was about the need for always having generalists, right? So I made a note to self here that I wanted to share with you all a little bit, right? So we're here at Surge because we care about scalability. Scalability, fundamentally, what we're all doing is pushing the boundaries of the possible to scale in ways that we couldn't before, right? And although the technologies, what those limits are, and those technologies are always going to change. That's what keeps this field young and exciting for us. The thing that's kind of a constant is that we continue to operate at this interface between the known and the unknown, the possible and the previously impossible. And that in that context, the industrial era notions of specialization as creators of efficiency and scale needs to be discounted. And it needs to be discounted because we are not operating in the area of the known, in the area of the completely repeatable. We're all operating in the area of the new, which is why we like being where we are, right? But we had not internalized this fully, and we had allowed these normal kind of industrial management style thinking about how we grew an organization, which wasn't even kind of conscious. It wasn't like we will make a choice not to have generalists. We will decide instead to hire narrow specialists who know one thing deeply. 5 minutes? So it had just happened, and it had been the wrong thing, but one has to keep in mind, as long as one deals in the realm of scalability, that these are the problems and this is the world that we live in. So So what happened? How do I pull this all together and end it for you? It took a long time. I think ultimately it probably took like 18 months to roll out the very last fix for this system, although, as is usually the case, we got to kind of the Pareto point fairly quickly. I spent a lot of time on that trading floor after that day. And I'm not a morning person. Trading floors start very early in the morning. It was a source of physical pain for me. But it was the right thing to do. I learned a lot. And it forced me, that whole process forced me at a conscious and unconscious level to rethink kind of how we do operations, how we scale organizations, what the role of operations should be, kind of what the culture in organizations should be as well, right? And I made it a point at that point to understand, believe deeply that operations is engineering in this realm that we operate in. Operations is engineering. Scalability is dealing with the unknown. We need generalists. We need people who can understand things deeply from end to end. We can't allow the technology barriers that ultimately our own industry will want to put up between us to separate us, to kind of separate us and partition us, because that will result in scalability failure. And that will result in operational failure and scalability failure. And that's how I've thought about building operational organizations. Operations is engineering. Engineering should be about operations as well. So, the day, the week, the month changed my thinking about how we scaling. Okay. Hopefully that was interesting, amusing, something like that for you all. And maybe you can learn from my mistakes. That's all I got. Thank you. Do we do Q&A? Is there a Q&A? Should we do Q&A, or am I done? Q&A? Anyone want to ask me questions? There'll be other opportunities today, but if you had a question you wanted to share with the audience and me, it'll get on the video that way. Sir, I'll have to repeat the question. So how do you break down the silos and the specialization, right? So, there's clearly, I think that the people who've been thinking a lot, paraphrasing Theo, the cult of DevOps seems to have one way of thinking about that. I think there's a lot of truth, actually, in it. I think, ultimately, so the first things are reward and recognize generalist skills, reward and recognize end-to-end ownership, deep vertical understanding of how things work, and not attempting to set boundaries for how people think about problems that are horizontal in the stack. I think you have to drive things that way. I think that quite consciously. So one of the things, I think Google does a very good job. There are some site reliability engineers here from Google who'll be talking about their domain a little bit later. I think Google does get this really, really right in that site reliability engineering, for example, it is engineering, right? And we go to great lengths to hire people who are capable of these tremendously deep engineering skills. These people are as qualified engineers as the people, and often are the people who produced the software that runs Google itself as well, right? And these organizations, and then culturally, we make these organizations all be peers. You have to respect and give a tremendous amount of power. Put really great engineers in these operational roles and give them a tremendous amount of authority over operations. I think that's kind of how you do it. And then the other thing you need to do is you need to make sure that at the end of the day, someone's accountable, right? If you can't point at who the person is who's accountable, or if the person who's accountable can't actually control getting things done, you might have a company where that could work, but it's a lot harder. Any other questions, sir? It's turtles all the way down. Yeah, that's it. So I'm sorry. Finish your question. I'll repeat it for the audience. Yeah. So, to paraphrase the question, if you couldn't hear it, or for those of you who are watching on video, the world is moving toward more and more APIs, creating powerful abstraction boundaries, but the challenge is how do we actually know what exists below those abstraction boundaries, and how do we make assertions about our systems that are relying on boundaries of abstraction we may not know, right? And we may not understand. Is that a fair recapitulation? from an organizational as well as a technical perspective. So again, it starts with, you don't know. There's this a quote, a Google quote, which I hope I'm allowed to repeat. I'll repeat anyway. It says, at Google, we don't just make the wheel, we vulcanize the rubber. And I thought about it a lot. I didn't use it earlier in this talk. I thought about it a lot because I think that one of the capabilities of teams that are able to deal with this turtles all the way down to abstractions on top of abstractions world that we're living in, right, where you're actually using an AWS service that's calling out to an App Engine service that's calling back to APIs from Yahoo or something like that, right? Or whatever the complex worlds that we live in order to deploy applications quickly. You need the people who want to work at a high level, but who can go all the way down to the atoms. I think so. The first part is, who do you have doing the work, right? I think the second part is, right, again, I think it's building an organization that understands and respects that, and that has the attitude that if I will use the highest level tools possible to get my job done, but if those tools are not, if there are not adequately high level tools, I will build them or replace them and so on myself. I mean, I think that, and again, listen, depending on where you are on the curve of what kind of scalability you need, this may be more or less appropriate. One of the amazing things about our industry is that the capability of off-the-shelf technologies to handle dramatically increasing workloads only grows and grows more astounding. I mean, I read Hacker News, right, and someone's reporting, I think, Nginx holding over 1 million simultaneous TCP connections and actually doing something meaningful with them, right? Scalability is whatever. I think someone had a plug for Haskell in there or something like that too, so my eyebrow went up when I read it. But scalability is, right, commodity scalability, where maybe it's okay for you not to understand it, is approaching and is sufficient for a larger and larger class of problems. But there's always going to be people like you all, I think, who need to operate at those limits. And if you operate at those limits, understand you're operating at those limits, right? In the same way that you might pack differently if you were going on a cruise versus if you were going to explore a new terrain. You need to kind of equip your team and think about your mission differently. The problem is you may be using similar tools, similar vocabulary, and you may think that you're in the realm of the known when you're actually not. And as leaders and as culture carriers for the organizations that you're in, you need to make sure that you talk about problems in ways that make it clear kind of where you are. It's hard for me to be more specific than that. It starts with really good people. It starts with understanding kind of your position in the scheme of things, and then. Sir, yes. How many people at Google know everything? I was advised by my friend Stu Feldman, who works at Google, that when asked a numeric question, there are only 3 answers: 0, 1, or infinity. And I'm not allowed to tell you which is the answer.
Does it fit your model?
So, in the sense that the number of people who are capable of doing, yes, who are doing deep dives, it very much does, right? And in life, almost nothing is 100%. But you can clearly see that the organization has been tuned around this idea, not that these people do transcend every boundary of abstraction, every layer in the stack every day, but that they can or they have, right? And it's not all the organizations, not all the time, and so on, but that is definitely the approach that we take. I mean, honestly, the realm of problems that an app like a Gmail has are very, very different from the problems that an app like Search has, or Ads, and so on. And you really need that ability to go end to end in each one of those cases. It's not, there's going to be some overlap, but not a lot. And we try to kind of raise the levels of abstraction. We have platforms, we have services, and so on that do create commonality where possible. But generalists, deep engineering skills who can go end to end dominate the conversation within the organization. Brian, sir. So Brian asked the question, are generalists born or can they be made? And it's actually a topic that he and I have discussed in other venues before. I'll share that with you all. Unfortunately, it requires a level of kind of inductive reasoning and empiricism to come up with an answer for that I find to be beyond me. Although in my current experience is that they're born, although they may not be born with the skills needed to do their jobs. In other words, that it starts with an attitude. And I'll share with you something that those of you who know me have heard me say before, but I believe that in our domain, the hallmark of a professional is a dedication to self-improvement, right? And it kind of, I think the generalist and the capabilities of the generalist begin with that more than they begin with a set of skills that you picked up in college or graduate school or wherever. What I've certainly seen in previous roles and at Google is that there are people who have this DNA. They may not have had the skills. They may not have been imbued with the skills through education or experience to exercise it, but they fundamentally have this attitude, right? They don't want to stop. They want to keep on digesting and understanding. They want to get down to the atoms, right? And we even have a concept inside Google, right, that we've been doing for a while now called SRE University, which is designed to take people who clearly had this bit of DNA, but it hadn't been activated, right, and try to give them the skills needed to cross that boundary and do that. That, like I said, I think it's only through meeting people and learning more that you actually form an opinion, and that's where my opinions are to date right now. But I don't think that you can actually take someone, because there are lots of people who are very happy doing their particular well-defined thing, right, for some level of well-defined, for some level of thing. I think it's people who resent boundaries and resent not knowing things, I think, are the ones that we need. Was there a question? Yes? How is your definition of a generalist different than an academic? So I should kick this off by saying that my father spent 40 years in the academy, is the author of 19 books and tenured historian. So the academy is by no means an insult to me. It's paid for my education. But how is generalist different from an academic? It's different in that I believe that academia, the academy, is about exploring and creating new knowledge. We're about getting things done. And the things that we need to get done may require us to develop new knowledge, but the end was not the creation of the new knowledge. The end was some artifact, some attribute, some process, some service, something like that, a more specific goal. There are many academics who make great practitioners, right? That they have a bunch of these skills. I work with many of them at Google. They've crossed the boundary, or they move back and forth between these boundaries. There are many who do not. In college, I worked with a brilliant computer science theoretician whose office contained a blackboard, a piece of chalk, a legal pad, and a pencil. Full stop. He was a brilliant theoretician, right? He was clearly not going to come across and build a super high scalability web application. I'm done. I'm told I'm done. I'm out of time. Okay, thank you all very much.